Sweetheart, let me handle this. You get emotional when we talk about money. My husband, David, patted my hand with that familiar condescending smile as he closed the laptop, hiding the screen from my view. For 15 years, he had been the financial genius, the one who managed our complex portfolio. I was just the artist, the creative, supposedly too sensitive to understand the numbers. He had no idea that for the past 6 months, while he was busy with his investments, I had been conducting a quiet, systematic audit of our entire life. And he certainly had no idea that an hour before this conversation, I had executed the final transfer, moving every last liquid asset into a new set of accounts that were in my name, and my name alone. This is the story of a man who thought his wife was a fool and a wife who was about to give him the financial lesson of a lifetime. If you believe a woman's greatest asset is being underestimated, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because you are about to witness the most satisfying asset allocation in history. Part 1. The scent of jasmine from our perfectly manicured backyard in Marin County drifted through the open French doors. It was a beautiful evening. From the outside, we were the perfect picture of Californian success. David, a handsome, charismatic wealth advisor, and me, Amelia, a moderately successful painter with my own small gallery. We had the house with the view of the Golden Gate, the Teslas in the garage, the life that everyone on our tranquil, tree-lined street aspired to. But inside our beautiful home, a quiet, insidious rot had taken hold. It was a rot I had ignored for years, a rot that smelled like lies. Tonight was the night it all came to a head. For weeks, I had been asking for a clear accounting of our finances. Not because I was emotional, but because I was logical. A letter had arrived from the IRS about an underpayment. A notice from our mortgage lender about a missed payment had shown up, quickly hidden by David. Small cracks were appearing in the flawless facade of our wealth, and my every question was met with a new form of patronizing dismissal. "It's just a clerical error, Amelia, nothing for you to worry about," he'd say. Or, "It's a complex hedging strategy, honey, it would just confuse you." And tonight, his favorite, "You get too emotional." He said it with such practiced ease, a line he had used 1,000 times to end a conversation, to shut down my inquiries, to gently reassert his control. He believed I was a financial innocent, a woman who understood color and form but not profit and loss. He had cultivated this image of me for years, and I, lost in my art and my love for him, had allowed it. I had let him convince me that I was incapable, that his world was too complex for my creative mind. I didn't argue. I just nodded and gave him a small, sad smile. "You're right, David," I said, my voice quiet. "I'm probably just being silly. I trust you." The relief that washed over his face was palpable. He had dodged another bullet, placated the emotional wife once again. He had no idea that my quiet agreement was not submission. It was the closing of a trap. For the last 6 months, my art studio had become a forensic accounting war room. While he was out on his boat or playing golf with his clients, I was on the phone with private investigators, with offshore banking specialists, and with the best divorce lawyer in San Francisco. I wasn't emotional. I was informed. And I had just quietly and legally taken back every single thing he had ever stolen from me, and from the women he had conned. Will this heartless gaslighting lead to a shocking karmic reckoning? This story of a hidden investigation is just getting started. If you're hooked by this story of karma, subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter. Part 2. Our life was built on a Californian myth. We met in our late 20s in San Francisco. I was a struggling artist, full of passion but with little business sense. He was a junior stockbroker, full of charm, ambition, and what seemed like a brilliant financial mind. He promised to take care of everything, to build a world where I could be free to create. "You handle the beauty, I'll handle the numbers," he'd said. It sounded romantic. It was, in fact, a contract for my own disenfranchisement. I came from a family of academics, people who valued intellectual and artistic pursuits over wealth. I had inherited a significant sum when my parents passed, a fact I was almost ashamed of. David saw my inheritance not as a safety net, but as seed capital. David is a man who is in love with the image of success. He is a narcissist, a master manipulator who uses his charm and a veneer of financial jargon to dazzle and confuse. His wealth advisory firm, West Coast Capital, was essentially just him, a leased office in the financial district, and a very slick website. He didn't have clients in the traditional sense. His business model, as I would come to discover, was a predatory form of a Ponzi scheme, targeting a specific demographic: wealthy, recently divorced or widowed women in the Bay Area. He would charm them, gain their trust, and then invest their fortunes into a series of shell corporations that all led back to him. Our entire lavish lifestyle, the house, the cars, the country club membership, was funded by his theft. I was not just his wife, I was his primary victim and his greatest shield. My family's old money and my genuine artistic career gave his operation a patina of legitimacy. I was the unwitting first lady of his fraudulent empire, the proof that he was a stable, successful family man. He kept me in the dark not just to control me, but to maintain my plausible deniability, to keep his greatest asset pure. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as the beautiful, unsuspecting face of his entire con. What is this secret investigation that could change everything? Part 3, The First Crack in My Perfect World, appeared 6 months ago. It was a letter addressed to me, that David hadn't intercepted in time. It was from a woman named Eleanor Vance, a recent widow from Atherton. The letter was polite, but firm. She was inquiring about the status of her investment, as she had been unable to reach Mr. David Miller for several weeks. My David Miller. I felt a cold knot of dread. I called the number on the letterhead. Eleanor was guarded at first, but when I introduced myself as David's wife, her voice changed. His wife? She had asked, a tremor in her voice. He told me he was divorced. That night, the conflict began. It was not a shouting match. It was a quiet, secret investigation. After David was asleep, I went into his home office, a room he had always called his sanctuary, and had forbidden me from entering. My hands trembled as I figured out the password to his laptop. It was, with a pathetic lack of imagination, my birthday. What I found was a labyrinth of lies. There were other women, at least 4 of them. All wealthy, all vulnerable. There were bank statements from accounts I had never heard of, wire transfers to offshore entities, and a separate calendar of client meetings that were clearly romantic dates. The primary obstacle was the sheer complexity of his fraud. He had woven a web of shell corporations and hidden accounts that was designed to be impenetrable. A simple divorce lawyer wouldn't be enough. I needed a specialist. I cashed in some old savings bonds my grandmother had left me, the only asset I had that he didn't know about, and hired a team, a forensic accountant who was a former FBI agent, and a private investigator who looked like a bored surfer but had a mind like a steel trap. The conflict was now a race. I had to unravel his entire financial life and secure my own assets before his house of cards inevitably collapsed, taking me down with it. Every condescending pat on the hand, every time he called me too emotional, was fuel for my quiet, methodical fire. Will a secret from the past turn the tables? Part 4. The pressure of my secret investigation was immense. I had to live a double life, playing the part of the trusting, slightly clueless artist wife while my team was digging into the grimy details of David's criminal enterprise. The ticking clock was the IRS letter. My forensic accountant, a man named Harris, warned me that it was a precursor to a major audit. David's web was beginning to unravel on its own. We had a limited window to act before the federal government froze everything. A key subplot developed around the other victims. My private investigator, a man named Jesse, began to discreetly contact them. Eleanor Vance, the first woman, was initially terrified, ashamed of being duped. But as Jesse shared the scope of David's fraud, her fear turned to a cold, hard anger. She agreed to cooperate. So did another woman, a retired surgeon from Napa. Together, we formed a secret, silent alliance of the women he had wronged. We shared information, we pooled our resources, and we found a collective strength in our shared betrayal. Our quiet, coordinated efforts added a new layer of complexity to the investigation, allowing us to trace money trails that a single person never could have found. The most difficult part was the emotional toll. I had to sit across the dinner table from a man I had loved for 15 years, a man who was a complete stranger, and pretend everything was normal. I had to endure his condescending lectures on finance, knowing that he was a fraud and a thief. I had to smile when he told me he loved me, knowing that he was lying. Every day was a performance. Every polite nod was a lie. I poured all of my rage, my grief, and my disillusionment into my work. My paintings from that period were dark, chaotic, and brilliant. It was the best work of my life, a secret chronicle of my husband's betrayal and my own quiet, methodical revenge. But will the next event shock everyone? Part 5. The turning point was a discovery made by Harris, my forensic accountant. He found the central pillar of David's entire scheme, a single master trust account in the Cayman Islands. It was the hub where he pooled all the stolen money before laundering it through his various investments. The problem was, it was legally impenetrable, protected by the Cayman's infamous banking secrecy laws. We could see the money flowing in, but we couldn't touch it. But then Harris found a flaw. A single, arrogant mistake David had made years ago. When he first set up our joint marital assets, he had linked our primary brokerage account to this offshore trust, likely to make his initial transfers easier. Critically, to do so, he had to make me a co-signatory on that offshore account. He probably forgot he had ever done it. He had spent 15 years telling me I was too stupid to understand finances, never imagining that he had given me the keys to his entire kingdom. This was it. The weapon I needed. The legal mechanism was complex. As a co-signatory, I had the right to unilaterally change the structure of the account, but only if I could prove spousal financial malfeasance. The evidence my team had gathered, the letters from the other women, the proof of his affairs, the fraudulent investment reports he had created, was more than enough. My lawyer, a woman as sharp and unforgiving as a razor blade, drafted the necessary documents. It took 3 days of frantic secret work with international bankers. It was a high-wire act of immense legal and financial complexity. The evening David patted my hand and called me too emotional. I was not emotional. I was victorious. The final transfer had been confirmed by my lawyer an hour earlier. Every liquid asset, every stock, every bond, every last stolen dollar from the Cayman account, had been moved into a new single-owner trust account in Switzerland, under my sole and absolute control. The trap was set. The safe was empty. All I had to do now was watch him try to open it. How will this shocking secret change their lives forever? This incredible twist has you hooked? Subscribe now for more stories of delicious karma. Part 6. The next morning, I woke up early. I made coffee. I sat in the sun-drenched breakfast nook and read the paper. I was a study in absolute calm. David came downstairs around 9, looking refreshed and confident. He had successfully placated his emotional wife once again. He poured himself a coffee and opened his laptop on the kitchen island, ready to start his day of managing our portfolio. I watched him over the rim of my coffee cup. I saw his confident expression shift to a slight frown. He clicked his mouse a few times. The frown deepened. He typed furiously. His shoulders tensed. "That's weird," he muttered, more to himself than to me. He logged out and logged back in. The screen showed the same thing. I knew what he was seeing. A long list of accounts, all with the same beautiful balance, $0. The immediate consequence was a slow, dawning panic. "What the hell is going on?" he said, his voice rising. "There's a glitch. A huge glitch." He picked up his phone to call the bank. His hands were shaking. I took another calm sip of my coffee. "It's not a glitch, David," I said, my voice even. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "I'm talking about our finances," I said, standing up and walking over to the island. "I decided to take your advice and stop being so emotional about them. I decided to get logical. So I moved everything. It's all in my name now. In Switzerland." It seems our complex portfolio was actually just a simple, straightforward case of theft. And I just stole it back. The reaction on his face was the most beautiful thing I had ever painted. It was a masterpiece of pure, unadulterated horror. Will they overcome this new challenge? Part 7. David's collapse was immediate and absolute. He went through a rapid-fire progression of denial, rage, and pleading. He called me a thief, a liar. He threatened to call the police, to sue me into oblivion. Then, when the threats didn't work, he tried to cry. He begged for my forgiveness, told me he had made a terrible mistake, that he still loved me. It was a spectacular performance, but I was no longer his audience. My growth in this chapter was in my refusal to be drawn back into his emotional chaos. The old me would have felt guilt, would have perhaps even believed his tears. The new me saw him for what he was, a predator who had lost his prey. The challenge was not to fight him, but to simply let the consequences of his actions play out. I had already won the war. This was just the final pathetic surrender. I didn't stay to watch the whole show. I had a bag packed. While he was still cycling through his emotions, I walked upstairs, grabbed my bag, and walked out the front door of the beautiful house that was now legally mine. My transformation was in that act of walking away. I was not the victim, slinking away in shame. I was the victor, leaving the battlefield on my own terms. I checked into a suite at a luxury hotel in the city, a suite paid for with my own, now secure money. From there, I coordinated with my team. My lawyer filed for divorce that afternoon, citing financial fraud. She also delivered the evidence of his Ponzi scheme to the district attorney's office and the SEC. My vengeance was not just personal, it was a matter of public justice. I was not just saving myself, I was ensuring he could never hurt another woman again. But what awaits them in the next confrontation? Part 8. The next few weeks were a legal and financial whirlwind, but it was a storm I watched from my calm, safe harbor. David, with no access to funds, was forced to hire a cheap, overworked public defender. He was facing a mountain of legal trouble from all sides: my divorce suit, a federal investigation from the SEC, and a class action lawsuit being prepared by the other women, led by the formidable Eleanor Vance. The climax was not set for a single, dramatic confrontation. It was a slow, methodical dismantling of his entire life, executed by the very systems he had thought he could manipulate. The preparation was in the meticulous paperwork filed by my lawyer, the detailed evidence presented by the SEC investigators, and the powerful unified testimony of the women he had wronged. My final move was a quiet one. The house in Marin, which was now solely in my name, was a painful reminder of my stolen life. I had no desire to live there. So, I had my lawyer draft one last document. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing to deliver the final poetic and most devastating blow of all. It was a quiet act of justice that would speak louder than any courtroom verdict. The final confrontation will reveal everything, won't it? Part 9. David was out on bail, living in a cheap motel room in the Tenderloin, his life in ruins. He was awaiting a trial he knew he would lose. The climax of my story with him came in the form of a single hand-delivered envelope. Inside was not a legal threat or a gloating letter. It was a quitclaim deed. I was giving him the house. The beautiful multi-million-dollar house in Marin. His lawyer, when he saw it, was ecstatic. It was a lifeline, a massive asset he could use to pay his legal fees, to try and rebuild. David, in his desperation, signed the papers immediately. The house was his. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was the final move I had made a week earlier. The vengeance was not in taking everything. It was in giving him back the one thing he thought he wanted, but in a state he could never have imagined. The day after he took possession, a fleet of official-looking vehicles descended on the property. They were from the IRS. Acting on a tip from my lawyer, they had finally executed their lien on the property. The years of David's tax fraud, the underpayments, the hidden offshore income, the bill had finally come due. They seized the house. His one remaining asset, the prize he had just been handed, was immediately taken to pay off a fraction of the massive tax debt he owed. But that was not the end of it. The next day, another group of lawyers arrived. They represented Eleanor Vance and the other women. They placed their own lien on the property, ensuring that if, by some miracle, there was anything left after the government was done, it would go to them, the women he had stolen from. I had not given him a house. I had given him a poison chalice, a financial black hole that would be the final, crushing monument to his ruin. But how will this change their future? Part 10. David was convicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and securities violations. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The house was sold at a government auction, and the proceeds were distributed among his creditors and his victims. He was left with nothing but a prison sentence and the knowledge that he had been completely and utterly outplayed by the emotional wife he had so casually dismissed. My own life began anew. I used a portion of the recovered funds to make Eleanor Vance and the other women whole, returning the money David had stolen from them with interest. The rest, I used to start a new life. I sold my gallery in San Francisco and moved down the coast to a small quiet art community in Carmel. I bought a small cottage with an ocean view and a beautiful light-filled studio. The emotional resolution was not in his imprisonment, but in my own liberation. I had not just reclaimed my money, I had reclaimed myself. I had discovered a strength and a competence I never knew I possessed. I continued to paint, but my work was different now. It was bold, confident, and full of a light that had been missing for years. I was no longer the creative who couldn't handle the numbers. I was the artist of my own, very well-managed life. A year later, I was having my first solo gallery show in my new town. The gallery was packed. Eleanor Vance and the other women had all driven down for it. We stood together, a small, strong circle of survivors, raising a glass of champagne. To you, Amelia, Eleanor said, her eyes shining. The most logical, unemotional, and brilliant woman I've ever known. We laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated freedom. My greatest work of art wasn't on the walls. It was the life I had built from the ashes of a beautiful, perfect lie. Do you think karma ends here? Financial abuse and gaslighting are insidious and powerful weapons in a relationship.
This story is a testament to the power of trusting your instincts, seeking knowledge, and reclaiming your own power. It's a reminder that being emotional is not a weakness. Sometimes, it's a fuel for our riches and logical fear. Have you ever had your intelligence or competence underestimated? Share your story of strengths in the comments below. If this story of a woman taking back her power resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more emotional tales of justice.